Good afternoon. Everybody hear me? All right. DJ, can I get you to help me hand these out? Actually, I'll let you hand them out. What's being handed out is a folder, and it has worksheets for the parables that we're going to talk about here over the next several Sundays. The good thing is a couple of them are very short, self-contained. As a matter of fact, we'll probably hit 3 of these. It's on. Can you hear me? Is it on? Is yours on? Okay. Okay, good deal. Excellent. You can, but I can't guarantee you. That they're yours. They're your responsibility.
Oh, okay.
So you won't forget. You can't get here without your truck, right?
There you go.
Unless you trade it in and leave it in there.
No.
Okay.
I won't get you a horse.
Here you go, get you a horse. I can't wait to see you come in here and show up on a horseback.
Get on with the lesson.
All right. Any case, if you need copies, more copies of the first things that we've done, the first couple worksheets that we did some things that had some questions and answers. If you need some copies of that, let me know. We'll make some more photocopies for you, but you can put those in the folder as well. But these are just simple worksheets. If you look at them, it says a study in the parables of Jesus has a parable number. We're just going to go through them, in a timeline. Title, text, theme, lesson, setting, explanation, application, and problems. Typically, we won't have problems, but sometimes we might have problems. And what we do is we write those problems down and we kind of work through them together. Well, what does that mean? I don't quite understand that. What's that thought? What is that? What are we talking about? Anyway. Okay, our first one is parable number 1, and if you want to write these down as we go through it, we'll that's helpful. The title of the parable is "Children of the Bride Chamber." As a matter of fact, you know what? I'll say the answers, and if we need to, I can get the little whiteboard up here, but we may not need to. You have something to do. You got to study to show yourself approved, brother. Yes, text. You're right. Text. Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2, verses 18 through 20. That's our first one. Mark chapter 2, verses 18 through 20. And the title is, of course, Children of the Bride Chamber. That's what name we're going to give it. Children of the Bride Chamber. Yes. That's parable number 10. No, it's parable number 1. Parable number 1. Title of the parable is Children of the Bride Chamber. Our text is Mark chapter 2. That's going to be our text for the first 3 that we're going to talk about. Mark chapter 2, verses 18 through 20. The theme is the good news of the kingdom. Good news of the kingdom. Let's look at it before we put down our lesson, because it helps to look at it before we determine what our lesson is going to be. Otherwise, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the parable say something that we've already determined. So let's look at the parable, and then we'll figure out what's our lesson from the parable. I know what I have it down as, but it helps to look at the parable first. So let's look at this, and what we're going to do is remember context, context, context. We're not just going to read the parable. Let's look at what's happening beforehand, because that's essential to understanding what's happening. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to chapter 2. We're going to start up at verse 15. The parable is found in 18 through 20, but let's start up at verse 15. It says, "Now it happened as he was dining in Levi's house." Who's Levi? Levi is also known as Matthew. Okay, so as he's dining in Levi's house, or Matthew's house, so then he is eating at someone's home. He's engaging in fellowship. Now here's the thing. Now this is a big deal, folks. When you read this, he's dining in Matthew's home. Who was Matthew? Matthew was tax collector. So was Matthew typically one who would have been associated with by the finer folks in society? No, they didn't like him. They felt he was a traitor. In their eyes, he was a traitor. And truthfully, he was. He was. He was not supposed to be involved in this kind of work, but he was. So, as it happened, as he was dining in Levi's house, that many who? Tax collectors and sinners also sat together with Jesus and his disciples. So we have a big, what we would call a breach of social etiquette, right? Okay. Here was Jesus, who was supposed to be this devout Jew, and his apostles, his disciples, all of them devout, and they're sitting there at dinner with Levi, or Matthew, the tax collector, with other tax collectors and sinners. So Matthew was not prone to hanging around with the very best of society. All right? And it says, continuing on, also sat together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. And when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eating with the tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, how is it that he eats and drinks with tax collectors and sinners? All right. So here's our context. They're eating they're feasting at someone's house. They're having fellowship with one another. And as we do today, most of our fellowship, some of our best fellowship comes around the dinner table, doesn't it? We enjoy it. When we break bread with one another, it brings us closer in a way that really no other way really does. I hear this all the time. I used to watch the cooking shows a lot. I wasn't so much a big fan of the ones where they sit in the kitchen, but I like the ones where they would travel and they would go to foreign lands. They would go to other places. And they would go and they would sit down there and eat with one another. And they said that something about food brings people together. Well, this is what's happening. They're eating together, and they're all coming together, and they're sitting there and they're eating. And Jesus has breached social etiquette, and then he is eating with people that the scribes and the Pharisees don't believe he should be eating with. Why is he eating and drinking with these sinners? The problem with this is what? We're all sinners. If we eat, we're eating with sinners. If we drink, we're drinking with sinners. That is who we are. So part of this goes into the idea about the concept of superiority. There are those who believe that they are superior because of who they are. All right. This is going to play into the idea of what the parable's about. So, not only did they think this, they didn't just think it in their minds. They asked his disciples. They said to his disciples, how is it that he eats and drinks with tax collectors and sinners? This great rabbi that you believe in so greatly, why is it that he is eating and drinking with these people that he ought not be associating with? All right. The truth of the matter is, it's a fair enough question, but their hearts were not interested in the truth, was it? That's not what they were interested in. What are they interested in? Finding a way that they can destroy him. Finding a way that they can bring him down. All right? They can chip away at his integrity, chip away at his reputation, chip away at his character. Okay. So, when Jesus heard it, it's funny, they were talking to his disciples, but Jesus heard it. All right? When Jesus heard it, he said to them, who did he say this to? Those who were asking the question. The scribes and Pharisees. All right? He said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Now, reading this particular portion of it on the surface, you would say, well, he's calling them righteous. Is he calling them righteous? No. No. Nowhere does he say that the scribes and the Pharisees are righteous, therefore they have no need of repentance. What he's doing is he's actually a very cutting remark. It's almost surgical in the way that he does this. He is telling them that every one of them have need of repentance. Were the scribes and the Pharisees going out to John to be baptized for repentance? No. Why? They didn't feel the need. They felt a superiority. They felt a sense of superiority because of whom they were. Now, because remember, Jesus calls them on this. He calls them hypocrites. They say one thing, yet they do another. They believed that they were right. They were righteous in the way that they stood before God. The truth of the matter is, they had as much need or more need of repentance as those that they were criticizing for doing the same thing. All right. So he's making this statement, and if only those who are truly self-righteous would look at this statement and say, well, that's who he's talking to me. I don't have need of repentance. I'm not sick. I'm well. I don't need a physician. But that's their self-righteousness speaking. not a true understanding of who they were and what they were. In their minds, they stood righteous before God, but they weren't. They had as much need of repentance as anyone else. But he's accurate here. Did the sick people, or the people who are well need a doctor? No. Do the sick people need a doctor? Yes. The problem is that we were all sick. And that's not the way they were reading this. Okay. So we have this particular portion, but this segues right into the next thing. All right. In verse 18, it says, the disciples of John and of the Pharisees were fasting. So in this feast, this meal that they were having at Matthew's house, there were disciples of John and there were disciples of the Pharisees. They were fasting. Now, the idea of fasting is one that's been around for a great number of years. It's something that's been practiced not only in the Jewish faith, but by all manner of world religions. The idea of fasting, withhold food from ourselves, and there's different reasons for it. Sometimes it's a health thing. There are issues that we can have with our health that sometimes just withholding food is the best thing for us for a period of time. Sometimes it's a spiritual thing. When Jesus fasted in the wilderness, did he do it for spiritual or physical reason? Spiritual reason. It's a physical thing that's done for spiritual reason, much like baptism, right? It's a physical thing that we do. We withhold food, but it's to accomplish a spiritual purpose. Okay, so here are these people, and they are fasting. Many of them fasted for different reasons. They fasted in different ways. Some it was a daily thing. They would take one day a week and they would not eat. Sometimes it was for a week. The human body can go 3 weeks without food. You're very, very weak at the end, but you can go 3 weeks without eating anything. All right? Not likely this was the case. What was the problem with the fasting of the Pharisees? Okay. They did it in such a way that they would be seen of men. It even said that they hollowed their cheeks. They would paint their faces. They wanted to make it a very, very visible thing, very visual. Why? Is it so God could see them? No, so man could see them. They would be glorified in doing that. They made a big deal of their fasting so that people would glorify them and compliment them and view them in a way that they truly didn't deserve, because the reason that they did it. It's almost like it fulfilled itself. I'm going to fast, but I want to do it to be seen of men, so my fasting is of no effect anyway. I did it for a spiritual purpose, but it hasn't availed anything spiritually. All right. So the disciples of John and of the Pharisees were fasting. Out of these two groups, which ones do you think were fasting for the correct reason? The whole point was repentance. And when they were repenting, their hearts were coming closer to God. So likely they were the ones that were fasting for the right reasons in the first place. All right. So the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees were fasting. And they came and they said to him being Jesus Christ, they said to him, why did the disciples of John and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not? Okay, so here we go. Here's the first of the parables that Jesus speaks to us, all right? Why did the disciples of John and of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. First parable, two very simple sentences, right? He's using a Socratic method, right? He answers a question with a question. They say, why do you not? And he says, well, in turn, I'm going to ask you a question. All right, so let's look at this. The setting is the banquet at Matthew's house. Here's the explanations, the idea of the explanations in our worksheet, all right? Their questions give rise to the parable. He's giving a parable in answer to a question that they are asking, all right? So number one, their questions give rise to the parable. He wouldn't have said anything had they not said something, but they asked a question, and so he poses a question back to them. That's explanations. Number two, under explanations, why does Jesus eat with sinners? Why does Jesus eat with sinners? And number three, why do your disciples not fast? Why do your disciples not fast? Right, that's under explanations. Okay, number one, their questions gave rise to the parable. The reason the parable was even given to them was because of a question they posed. Number two, why does Jesus eat with sinners? Why does Jesus eat with sinners? Number three, why do your disciples, and I use this in quotation marks, why do your disciples not fast? Jesus has asked that question. Why do the disciples of the Pharisees and of John, why do they fast, but your disciples do not fast? That's simply the explanation, but we got to look at what's the application to this, not necessarily the explanation, the application, because that's what we get out of it. That's what benefits us. All right. Application. So let's think about this for just a couple moments. I want you to read this parable again. I want you to read it. I'm not going to read it out loud. I want you to read it again real quick, and then I want you to think about the applications to this parable. And then we'll talk about it. All right. Has everybody read it? All right, read it through a couple of times. All right, so let's look at this. Remember, we cannot allegorize the parable. We're not looking at every single aspect of the parable and trying to find some significance to it. It doesn't necessarily mirror everything. Okay? What we're trying to do is look at an overarching reason behind the parable. So let's think about this. Can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? What is he referring to here? Okay, a marriage what? Okay, it's a festival, right? I'm trying to think of the right word. It is a feast. It's an observance. Okay, so here you have this observance. Today, for example, especially in this area of the country, if you went to a wedding and it was simply a wedding, and then after the ceremony was over, everybody got in their car and drove away, what would you think? What's wrong? This is the South. Where's the fellowship hall, and where's the nuts and the punch and the cheese straws and the wedding cake, and where's the food? Where's the drink? Where's all the good stuff? So, in the same way, Jesus is giving that idea. A wedding is a time to rejoice, a time to feast, and a time to get together and to enjoy not only the company as it was, but also the food that goes along with it. All right. So he's saying here it would make no sense for people who are with the bridegroom, who are enjoying this time of festivity, for them to fast. It doesn't make any sense. What do? You enjoy the time that they have while they're together, right? That's kind of makes sense, right? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, you can't fast. The whole point behind a wedding was to a feast back then was sometimes a multi-day, sometimes it might have been a week. And every day it would have been another, just an abundance of food and of drink and of merriment and of fellowship and all of these things. All right? So he asks them a question. Can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? What's a rhetorical question? What's the answer? No. Not only that, you wouldn't. And he says that. As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. So he answers his own question. He asks them a rhetorical question, and then he answers the rhetorical question. All right? So having that in mind, but the days will come when what? The bridegroom will be taken away with him. And if you think about the idea of a wedding, when the wedding party leaves, what happens? Time to go home. Time to go home. We got to clean up. If you've ever been stuck after a wedding cleaning up, you know what you want to have happen? Everybody that's not supposed to be there needs to head on. Grab you a little napkin full of nuts and a little plastic thing of punch and make your way to the door because it's time to go home. All right. I exaggerate because that's the case. The days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. He'll no longer be there, and in those days they will fast. All right. Now he's using two extremes. He's using the extreme idea of fasting versus a feast. Most of the time we find ourselves somewhere in the middle, don't we? We don't feast every day, but we don't fast every day either. So he's trying to show up a consistent average in those two. He's just using two extremes to come to that conclusion. All right. So what do we get from this? What's our application from this? Number one, I will tell you one. It's something you may not have thought about. Here's the first. Here's one that I have, and then we'll ask a little bit more. Number one, the gospel does not bind Jewish feasts. The gospel does not bind those things, which is important because we're getting into the idea of the old versus the old trying to be attached to the new. We're going to get into that in verse 21. Okay, the gospel does not bind Jewish feasts, and that'll be one of our applications for the next two parables as well. All right. So, what other applications can we get from this? Okay. All right. And how's that? Okay, the application to us then. That was certainly the case in what was happening here. But what would that application be to us today? Observe what? No. Sorry. Sorry. No. Okay.
We observe the Lord's Supper.
And all of this is true, but remember the feast. We be careful not to allegorize. The feast that they're talking about here is not the feast right up here. Let me give you a buzzword and tell me what you think about this. The idea of change. The idea of change. Look at what's happening here and the concept of change that is going to occur, and tell me what you think in regards to that. Think about what's going to happen. He's going to be taken away, but not only is he going to be taken away, there's even a greater change that's going to occur. The old law will be taken away. The old law will be taken away. And with it, all of the other things, the idea of the feasts and the idea of all of these days of celebration and all of these things are going to do what? They're going away. That's the concept behind this, because this goes back into the next two parables as well. The idea of change. Change is going to come. Change is going to come for these people. Okay? The friends of the bridegroom, there's going to be a change that's going to occur. And they're going to have to adapt to that change. There are things in their lives that are going to change dramatically. Change is going to come. Sometimes it comes slowly. There were those, as we read, that still continue to want to bring the old law forward into the new law. Okay? Change is going to come slowly. They didn't understand that immediately, and it took time for them to understand that was not the case. Okay? Also this, change is going to meet resistance. Change is going to meet resistance. That's the third one. Number one, the gospel does not bind Jewish feasts. Why? Because there's a change that happens. Those are no longer in effect. I hear about members of the Lord's church, and members of the Lord's church who celebrate Lent. They're not even Catholic. They're celebrating Lent. I've heard of Christians observing a Passover Seder. We don't celebrate Passover. Why would we celebrate a Passover Seder? Seder is just a meal. It's that period of fellowship, that meal right before the Passover. Why would we celebrate a Passover Seder? There's no reason for us to do that. That's a Jewish feast. That's a Jewish celebration. We're not Jews. It doesn't avail us anything. All right? So the gospel does not bind them, for one. Number two, change comes slowly. Change comes slowly. And change is going to meet resistance. Well, we think things are hard. You think things are a hard slog now. You get a lot of congregations and getting to change, sometimes even the smallest ways. Sometimes people back their ears and they think it's unscriptural. I remember trying to get a projector in use, or to project the songs up on the screen, not here, elsewhere. And there were people who just, nope, don't want to do that. Well, why not? No good reason, just don't want to do it. But it could be of assistance. And it was just this big fear of change. Now, there's nothing unscriptural about it. That's the way that it is. All right? The change is going to meet resistance. The question is this: how do we meet change? You think about the way things have changed over the past 30, 40 years. The rise of different methods of getting the gospel out to people. The internet. I know people who thought it was absolutely foolish. Their church doesn't need a website. Church doesn't need to put their stuff on YouTube. Church doesn't need to do this. Church just needs to preach the word. Well, that's what we're doing. We just have a different method of delivery. Yeah. You got how many billions of people go online. I know this, but one of our studies on Sunday night, I believe on Wednesday night, has 400 views. The one on Hinduism. Many of them are positive because people don't want to hear it. That's understandable, but it doesn't change the fact that we have to get the word out. We do what we can to make the gospel available to everyone, and it may hurt some people's feelings. It may offend some folks, but remember, the truth is a stumbling block. Jesus is a stumbling block. All right, so with that in mind, we've got that parable kind of locked down, because he segues immediately into the next two parables. All right, the next two. We're going to talk about those today. Any questions about this one? Because they're all three right there together, and they all three have something to do with one another. So unless we think there's some huger, greater, deeper meaning to this, there's really not, because he goes right into the next part of this. So this is parable number 2. No problems on that one. Problems in the idea of how do we? It's not really an answer, but how do we meet resistance in regards to change? You could write that down as a problem. Brethren's resistance to change. Is it still the same? Do we still have problems with it today? Yes, we do. The idea of change in changing people's minds in regards to how they've always viewed their faith. When you talk to people in denominations and you confront them on an error, do they throw up a little bit of resistance? Do they throw up resistance? Yeah. You confront them in some error, and they have a great deal of resistance, because that's the way they've always believed. That's the way my mom and dad believed. That's the way my preacher believed. And they cling to that to the point where they reject the truth, simply because the change is too great for them to overcome. They can't wrap their minds around it. They can't be willing to accept it, to give up a long-held belief, that cognitive dissonance. All right, so here we go. Parable number 2. We're just going to go straight down through here. Jesus is continuing speaking here. So parable number 2, the title of the parable is Patches on Garments. Patches on garments. Here he's talking about, we'll get into it in a second. Patches on garments. And the text is verse 21. Mark 2, verse 21. Same theme. Good news of the kingdom. Good news of the kingdom. Because it is good news. In spite of how much it may have scared people, how much they may have been resistant to it, it was still good news to them. You know? They were apprehensive about it, weren't quite sure about it, even though it was good news for them. It was going to take away all of that old law that was so burdensome, going to give them something better, but sometimes people are scared of change. All right? So parable number 2, patches on garments. Text is Mark 2, verse 21. The theme is good news of the kingdom. The lesson is pretty much the same as well if you want to put that down. It's a comparison of old and new. Or compatibility might even be a better one. Compatibility of old and new. Here it shows that the old and the new don't mix very well. Now, for everybody, just a little bit of an example. Everybody here has done laundry in the past. Everybody who's ever been a seamstress, if you've ever taken up sewing and you've done that kind of work, you might get a sense of understanding when we read this parable. Let's just read it real quick. Verse 21. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and the tear is made worse. Let's think about that for just a second. All right, setting is the same. Banquet at Matthew's house. He's still asking the question. The explanation. This is all in response to the first question that they gave him, and he's talking about the incompatibility of the old with what's coming. All right. The explanation is why are these people mixing? Why are the sinners mixing with the saints, so to speak? So let's look at this. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and the tear is made worse. So he's giving them an example using a basic understanding of how things work in the physical world. Now, what's this explanation? Somebody give me some insight into this. Okay. Now, how does that correspond to what he's saying? The idea of the old garment and the unshrunk. What's happening?
It's incompatible.
Okay.
It's an old garment.
Okay. Okay. So here, but and that's accurate. That's accurate. But let's look at it a little bit more. The idea of an unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Why is there a compatibility problem? You got an old garment, and it's been through the wash. It's stretched as much as it's going to stretch. It's shrunk as much as it's going to shrink. If you got a pair of jeans. I've had a pair of jeans before that I had for about 5 or 6 years. They were about as worn in as they were going to get. Now, if I had developed a hole or some sort of worn place, and I had taken another piece of denim, and I sewed it on there, what's happening with that new piece of denim? What's going to happen? It's going to shrink up. It's going to pucker around the seams, because it's going to want to shrink up where my old garment has gotten about to that point as it's going to get. That's the idea of the physicality behind the parable. So what happens is it'll shrink up, and it'll pull away. Now here he's talking about not just cloth. He's talking about something that may have been made from skin, animal skin, which is even more so. I mean, it's an even bigger difference. And since it gives less, it will instead of pulling the other cloth closer, it will shrink up, and it will actually pull away from the old garment completely. It'll pop the thread that's holding it together. That's the physicality behind it. Now let's look at the spiritual aspect of it. All right, what is he talking about here? It's an incompatibility with old and new. Old and new. What is he talking about, though? The laws of, the Mosaic law and the law of Christ. Okay? He says they're incompatible. You'll notice that in no way are they compatible. Once again, you can't bring anything from the old into the new. Nothing. None of the old covenant was applicable to the Christian. None of it. Every bit of the law of Moses was nailed to the cross, as we said this morning in services. The old law is over and done with. It must be done away with. Nothing can be brought forward and tacked on. Well, we'll bring that's why I always get a I don't know if I would call it a chuckle because it mostly aggravates. But the idea of we're going to get rid of this, but rather than completely get rid of it, we're going to tack on a bunch of stuff at the end, like a law, the laws of people that our government makes, something that's so completely, unnecessary. So what do they want to do? They don't want to get rid of it completely. They want to continue to tinker with it and tack things onto it and so forth and so on until the very end. Have you ever seen have you ever watched or seen those things where they do? Trying to think of the right word. Not project cars, but cars that they've designed. These great new designs of automobiles. Thank you. I couldn't remember the project. That doesn't sound right. Concept cars. And these guys, they have a blank sheet of paper, and they say, we want you to design a car from scratch, from the ground up. We want you to design this car. And they put something on paper, and you think, wow, boy, if that's what comes to market, sign me up. I'm going to go ahead and put my order in. I'm going to put a deposit down on this. Then what happens? Well, the bean counters get a hold of it, right? All the guys that say, well, if we have this is going to add about $5,000 to the car. This is going to add this. So what they do is they start taking away the things that make it good, and they start bringing. We've still got a bunch of these things in parts bins at the factory. We really need to use this up. So you've got this fresh, new, clean slate concept that people have decided that, well, that's not going to quite be what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this, and we're going to take this off, and we're going to put this. And what happens at the very end? It's this ugly abomination of a vehicle that doesn't look that much different from what they had before. They've ruined it by doing something like that. That is a very hollow, superficial concept behind what he's trying to tell us here. You can't bring forward the old and attach it to the new. It doesn't work that way. Because what happens? If you tried to do that, what would it be like if they took Christianity and then added everything, all the stuff that they wanted from the old covenant? What would it look like? It wouldn't be. Who would be able to understand it? There would be nothing to be understood about that. The whole idea behind Christ dying on the cross is so that he could erase all of the things that were unnecessary and only leave what is absolutely necessary. He distilled service to God. He distilled obedience to God to its purest form. He took out all of the old stuff that was unnecessary. And not only this, but think about this. Who gets to determine what gets brought forward? Everybody. What's in their own minds? Does each person get to say, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm also going to keep this and this? Well, I'm a Christian, but I don't like that. I'm going to keep this and this. I'm a Christian, and you can see what happens. Every single person gets to decide what they're going to bring forward. So what does God say? Nobody brings anything forward. It's all new. Don't tinker with it. In many cases, in many cases.
Church from a lot of the
if you look at the way that the world began to, or that people began to fall away from the church, you'll find very specific instances of specific things that they just couldn't let go of. Things that they just could not leave alone. And they wanted to bring forward. You're right. And almost Jewish traditions. Absolutely. The Catholic Church is steeped in Jewish tradition. The pomp and the circumstance behind it, and the idea of the priest coming through. I mean, if you look at the way that, when the priest walks down that big aisle and he's swinging the censer and he's holding up the icon of, that is very much falls in line with the way that the high priest would bring the offering before God. And he would take it and he would wave it, and he would heave it, and he would swing the golden censer with the incense inside of it. They're very much mirrors what they did under Judaism. But there are a lot of other things as well. I mean, that's just one. But here Jesus is saying none of that is compatible with what is going to come. When the bridegroom is taken away, it will be new, completely new, like from scratch, from a clean sheet of paper. It's not like anything that they'd ever known before. Okay? All right, so that's the second one. Let's go right into the third one, because the third one is very much like the first two. Incompatibility. Yeah, I mean, think about it. Well, what did we talk about? What are the applications? What were our applications? Incompatibility, right? Yeah, incompatibility. The need for a new start, need for a new slate. Absolutely. I don't have all these written down. We're going to come up with these applications on our own. So I just got the first one. So everything that we talked about here, that's our application. Absolutely. All right, so let's go straight back into verse 22. Almost everything is the same at the top. The idea of the good news of the kingdom of God, which is the church. It's just verse 22 is our text. Setting is still the banquet at Matthew's house. Explanations, the same. Question is, what is our application? Explanations are the same. This is all in regards to the question that he gave them. Why do your disciples not fast? And he launches into a 3-parable explanation about why he doesn't do as they do. Remember the whole point. John's mission was not an end unto itself. John's ministry was not an answer in and of itself. It wasn't an end unto itself. There's a purpose behind it. It was to usher in something better. All right. So verse 22, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine bursts the wineskins. The wine is spilled and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins. All right, let's think about this for just a second. Rather than what? Let's think about who. There's old wine and there's old wineskins. Who are the old wineskins? Those living under the law of Moses. Okay? The old law went into the old wineskin. They were vessels. Okay? That's who the old law was given to. It was given to those underneath the old law. And those only under the old law. But remember, when we are baptized into Christ, we become new creatures. New creatures who are deserving of a new wine. So he's not just talking about what here, he's talking about whom. The old wineskins are those under the old law. The new wineskins are those under the new law. You don't put old wine into new wineskins. You put new wine into new wineskins. The idea behind a wineskin, I just looked up a little bit of it, and the concept behind it, I actually watched a little video where people made wineskins. It was very educational. I thought it was pretty neat. But they would do this, and they would make these wineskins, and the edges they would sew in such a way that they were waterproof. Of course, being animal hide, they are waterproof. But when they make those out of a new something that has not been around a long time, hasn't formed a shape. They showed an old wineskin, and that thing was hard as a rock. I mean, you could sit there and you tap it, and it would sound hard because it was old and it had achieved a certain shape because of the way it was stored, and it couldn't move. But when you're making new wineskins in that fermentation process, that wineskin has to be able to expand to accommodate it. That's why you put new wine into new wineskins. If you put new wineskins into old wine, or new wine into old wineskins, what happens? There's something that's going to give. Either a seam is going to burst, or the way it's capped and the way it's sealed up at the top is going to blow off. And then what happens? You lose everything. You'll either blow out the wineskin, or the wine it'll explode and come forth, and you've lost your wine. Either one is not acceptable. It just goes to show, again, the idea of the compatibility of the old law versus the new law. The old wineskins represent those who were under the law. The new wineskins represent those who are under the law of Christ. The new wine is the law of Christ. The old wine is the law of Moses. And if you look at it from that standpoint, pretty self-explanatory. Pretty easy to understand. So what are our applications? Are we to be filled up with the law of Moses or the law of Christ? Law of Christ. All right? Absolutely. And once again, not to allegorize. We cannot give an explanation for every single thing of it. You think about it this way. When it talks about the new wine, it says the new wine expands. Remember, the Jews were not proselytes, or they didn't go around proselytizing. They weren't interested in new converts. They didn't make a big effort. If you wanted to become a Jew, you had to come to them. They didn't go out saying, hey, we're going to evangelize. We're going to take the gospel of Moses to everyone that we possibly can. We want as many people to be Jews. They weren't. They were very self-absorbed in many ways. They felt themselves against the world, and they were a close-knit group of people. They didn't want converts. But you think about the idea of the new wine and how it explodes and it comes forth, and that idea of it expands. And like I said, I'm not trying to allegorize, but that is something that kind of jumped out at me. You know, when we put, we are the new wine. The law of Christ is the new wine, and it goes forth. The old law couldn't contain it, okay, because it flew in the face of everything that the old law did. It didn't. Those two things were not compatible. Any problems with either of these two? They're pretty self-explanatory. I mean, there's not much that you could disagree with them on, because they're very easily understood. It tells you everything that you need to know based on what it says. There's no real deeper meaning other than that. You know, the old law is not compatible with the new. The old is not compatible with the new. The old is not compatible with the new. And when and there are folks who still want to bind the old law on us today, and we can't. We're not held responsible for obeying the old law. If we're going to obey a portion of it, we have to obey all of it, not just a portion of it. And who gets to determine which portion? That doesn't make any sense either. You know, well, I think we need to observe this feast, but not this one. I think we need to observe this tithe, but not this one. There's the problem. There's the problem. All right, we're running out of time anyway. We might hit if you can think of anything else, please read these for next time. I have, and I apologize, what I meant to do, I have a list of the parables, all of the parables, the text, everything that we're going to study, and I forgot to make a copy of it. I thought I had sent that, but I sent something else by mistake. I apologize. All right. I think I sent it. I think I sent it to you yesterday, but I didn't say anything. I didn't tell you to print it. You were not on the hook for anything. I didn't say anything. I think I sent it so that I would have it here. I will go and see if I can find it, and if I can, I'll go ahead and make some copies, and I'll put them out here so that you can know what we're going to talk about next time. As we go.
What you say?
As we go.
Oh.
Yeah. Not all at once. As we do each one. Any questions?
Now, you won't be here next week, right?
No, sir. No, sir. But I will be here the week after that.
Yeah.
Who's going to teach? The fellow that was here from Schaefer Road last time. I can't remember his name. I didn't get to... Rogers, thank you. Brother Rogers will be here next week. You'll be here for class, service, and then class on next Sunday afternoon. And Joshua is going to do our Wednesday night class for this next Wednesday. So, any questions? I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask questions. Even if I don't know the answer, I'll go home and look at it. I'll look at it and study it, see if I can come up with an answer. But like I said, if we look at things very simply, the answer is very simple. When we try to complicate the parables, is that when problems arise, when we try to assign everything a value, then we don't understand when this doesn't have a value, and it's a short-sighted way to look at the parables, because we get frustrated. Well, I don't know what this means. Well, it doesn't mean anything. It's just that's the person in it, so forth and so on.
We won't be just
I don't know, maybe. Depending on the discussion. I have a couple more folders. If anybody needs one, I've got some more, and we can make as many of these as we want. It's not a problem at all. All right. If there's nothing else, we're going to go ahead and have our invitation. If anyone who needs to respond to the invitation this afternoon, we want to give you that opportunity right now. If you need the prayers of the congregation, anything that might be going on, we want to be made aware of it because we can't pray for you unless we know. We want to be able to pray. It's a privilege that we have for one another. If you need the prayers of the congregation, come while we stand or while we sing.
772. Why do you wait, dear brother? Oh, why do you tarry so